Alright everyone, we start off today with another epic win, another I told you so moment for Clankdom involving Breadtube. You'll remember last year, I think early last year, although it might have been the one before, I kind of lost track. Do you remember when one of the grease tubers was, attempting to antagonize me without me even having the benefit of knowing who the fuck it was? And then I looked into Breadtube briefly, because I said, well, I'm hearing about this organization or loose association of different creators that are all leftoids. Let me Google that, although I think I had already started to not use Google for any meaningful searches, for not without good reason, and found, okay, there's this collective of people there, and basically it's a grift. They want attention. There's deliberate attempts at cyber manipulation, specifically algorithmic hijacking, which we can get into. And I didn't want to give him attention because the only way to win a game against someone whose entire forte is I need attention, doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, to draw people into discussions, debates, etc., and to grift off of them either for fun and profit or, in the case of Breadtube, for expanded interest. If you can get someone to debate you, if you can, because of the way the internet works, if you can associate your username with them, you sort of co-evolve together. You unwittingly or not, you're now linked together in such a way that occasionally when someone is searching you, they're finding them and vice versa. Great way to grow, especially if you can get larger creators to be the ones giving you attention. Of course, I am a far larger creator than Vaush, who was antagonizing me at the time, so why would you give the attention? But now, and this is hilarious, link in the description, not archived, it's a YouTube video. Jimmy Dore himself, actually, in association with Blumenthal, actually, revealing, yes, indeed, my initial supposition when I made my first video about Breadtube and said, look, this is clearly an AstroTurf. It's centralized at some level. It turns out that's true. It's actually more centralized than I would have thought. I figured, hey, some craptivistic group has decided to AstroTurf these grifters into various positions, possibly with help from, legacy tech at some point. Now, it's state-funded in part, specifically by the British government. So, before I get into how fucking funny this is and say I told you so multiple times, keep in mind there will be a pinned comment down below if you're watching this video on YouTube. I make exclusive content every day on all of the platforms that are linked there in the pinned comment that don't go on YouTube. Partially because of algorithmic things repeatedly mentioned lately on YouTube videos. Probably because YouTube's algorithms have begun to suck donkey balls. I said, within a half an hour of hearing the term Breadtube, with the most cursory examination of the content and the style of creation, it was obvious that there was some centrality. Now, initially, I figured it was some of the same craptivistic groups that attempt to manipulate things on Reddit. It seemed the same. It seemed like that. Now I'm wondering, well, maybe those groups in turn are actually associated with the shadowy backers of the breadliners. And by the way, I know I use the term breadliners because breadlines is what happens when you get leftoidism. Now, long story short, what Breadtube pretends to be is a de-radicalization effort. Well, we're getting people off of fascism. Turning someone who, they would consider you to be a fascist if you have libertarian or Trump populistic views. When you take someone who has those relatively mundane views, they're basically a right centrist, and you convince them to follow a form of Marxism, that's not de-radicalization, that's the opposite. That's number one. Number two, by the way, and I should point this out, I am not on board with the Caleb Malpin, Blumenthal leftoids any more than I would be the breadliners. To be clear, they're all atrocious. Jimmy Dore is one of the few that has any sanity and isn't a complete bleeding heart pacifist. So basically, here's what the left civil war boils down to. And then you've got the anti-SJWs, which a handful of them still oppose censorship. But here's the two main cores of the nouveau left. You've got the dandruff and soot stuffy leftoids like Caleb Malpin. They are East Bloc enthusiasts. They openly root for China and Russia. They don't like the United States. They believe that it should recede as a power in the world and that would be a good thing. They never quite explain why other players, given the latitude to do so, wouldn't be just as imperialistic, because there will always be an imperialistic central source of power or a dipole in the world. But they're hoping that you won't ask that question because they want the main power in the world to be China. So they are a bunch of greasy sellouts and bullshitters, and they wear ill-fitting suits, and they're a bunch of man boys, basically. On the other side, you've got Breadtube. Now, initially, people would look at like Blumenthal or Maupin or something and say, well, you know, Maupin was with RT. He even bragged about that being on TV once, which I thought was hilarious. It's like, I'm on shortwave radio. Wow. Antiquated technology at this point, dude. When you look at like Blumenthal or these people, when you see the suits and corporate work, you'd say, okay, they're centrally funded. Breadtube, in part, sets itself apart from that aspect of the grift left, because they're all grifters, by pretending to be grassroots, branding itself as, hey, our money comes from super chats, we're men and women of the people, mainly men. It's a sausage fest on the far left, by the way. And you know, so you can trust us. We're better than them. And by the way, we don't have a problem with the basically U.S. tankies, if that makes sense in some sense. Some of these people are actually very pro-imperialism. That is, they've gone to the other side. Instead of being like, I hate the United States, fuck you, hail China, you know, very confused moron like Maupin. They go way off into the other side, and they're like, oh yeah, I think we should bomb Syria. Yeah, bombing people is fun. And we should invade Iran too. It doesn't really make sense. You've got these massively divergent viewpoints on that issue. Keep in mind, on economics, it's basically all the same thing. And so the more erudite, well-spoken, suit-wearing leftoid can ridicule Vaush for being a grease master. And he can ridicule Caleb Maupin or something as being a goddamn sellout and completely out to lunch. They're all right. Every single thing that they're saying about other leftoids is correct. They all suck. So keep in mind, there's no sides to be taken in this. I'm just laughing because I was right. It turns out there is indeed a central... You can watch the Jimmy Dore video for yourself. Again, link in the description. Just go ahead and let him sum it up. He'll explain it more succinctly. I'm just here to laugh, basically. There is a central source for some of these creators that is state-associated in order to try to promulgate an imperialistic policy. so here you got the Atlantic Council sort of people, which, by the way, Jared Holt now works for a subsidiary of. Just so that we're aware about how one hand washes the other among leftoids and among quasi-leftoids. The nexus of corruption and sleaze there is pretty advanced. I love it when people are like, well, look, this Republican just got in trouble for embezzlement. Sitting there looking over at the liberals, the post-liberal left, and I'm like, there's really no comparison here. I hate to say, but there's a little bit of a differentiation between the populistic side of things and the greaseball left. So you've got the AstroTurf left, and then you've got the, not AstroTurf, but directly foreign-funded left. So it's basically... They're all funded by a state or a corporate entity. It just depends on which state or corporate entity it is. It turns out that they're not actually surviving off of super chat money. Well, by the way, if this is true, why are you even taking the goddamn money then? You don't need it. You're getting your checks signed by George Soros or something like that, by the Atlantic Council. Why would you need little Timmy's super chat money? He wants to send a super chat to make a misogynistic joke, which would be considered very funny by most breadliners. Greasy people, also highly obsessive. It's funny because you've got a person who has astroturfed as though they're not centralized. Again, man of the people, I'm just a creator, I happen to be on the left, and I'm an intellectual or whatever they claim to be. And it depends on the breadliner. And so people, they have kind of a rabid fan base. I mean, it's not as big because there aren't that many rabid leftoids in the world, but the ones that exist are quite rabid about these creators. It's like, I tried to warn you. I literally warned you that this was astroturfing and grifting. You didn't believe me. You thought that I was being cowardly by not wanting to give attention to people whose entire MO is get attention and then promulgate, apparently, an aspect of U.S. foreign policy in part. Although, again, the bigger part of it's the leftoidism. Jimmy Dore wouldn't have any problem with the fiscal views. They're all a bunch of socialists. They believe that the state needs more power, and that this time when we expand the state, it won't get abusive. It'll actually trickle down to the poor. They'll actually get more welfare, and UBI will work. This time, this new government program will be spectacular. All the others failed, but this time we've gotten it right. This time we spit-shined the turd, enough so that it no longer tastes bad, or rots in the sun and gets covered in flies and maggots. Bullshit. And that's what Breadtube is. Fucking bullshit. I love watching the leftoids tear one another apart. I'm sure they'll have a million hilarious rebuttals about how it's not true, or it'll be a straw man, or it'll be just deflection. It'll be like, well, you work for the Chinese state government. At least my checks come from Uncle Sam, or something bizarre like that. Not exactly the same as the left of the 2000s, if I remember correctly, in the peak Iraq War era. I think there was a little bit of different discoursing going on in most leftoid circles. I wonder why the left is dying. That's about all. Peace out.